Yeah, welcome everybody. A very good evening. Welcome to tonight's program. My name is Terra Dakota, and I am your host of this evening. Tonight marks the second program as part of collaboration with the Eureka project. Eureka, short for European Urban Regenerators Knowledge Alliance, is a training program that responds to real-life challenges of urban transformation. This is a 3-year project set to create a multidisciplinary curriculum designed jointly by universities, cultural practitioners, and policymakers for a rising professional profile of urban innovators. The project will identify needed skills and develop a training that addresses the current job market's demands across Europe. Eureka is a European-centered project with partners from 4 different countries, the Netherlands being one of them, Italy, Romania, and Spain, and it is co-founded by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union. And tonight, we're diving into the topic of storytelling in urban developments and how we can tell a compelling and inclusive story of an urban development project. All this while delicately balancing between marketing and authentic representation. We will explore this with Nina Karim van Oort, Anouk Rijntjes, Simeon Blom, and Cas Woudstra, who will join me later at this table. We also want to welcome the audience here. Welcome once again. And those watching from home, we have an online audience also joining us. We would love to include all of you into this conversation. So if you are at home and you have any questions, go to menti.com, www.menti.com, and use the following code that is 64382986. I repeat, 64382986. But if you are in the room and you would like to ask questions, we will be having various question rounds. So if you have a question for one of our panel members, please raise up your hand and a mic will be handed to you. And that being said, let's start with the first speakers of today, of this evening. I would like to invite Chandresa and Mara, who are about to give us a presentation of Project Eureka. Chandresa and Mara, please join me. Yeah, give them a hand of applause, people. Of course. Your lecturer just noticed that, or told me that you are not here by yourself. You are here with a group of students, because together you have been working on the project Eureka. Who in this room is also a part of this project? I believe there are various students. Ah, kijk. Welcome. Yeah, good. Okay, so, do your best to represent your team very well. Chandresa and Mara, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this event on authentic storytelling in urban development projects. We are quite excited to be here tonight and talk about such relevant topics, about how to tell the story of our city. But let me introduce myself. I'm Chandresa.
And I'm Mara.
And together we represent the Dutch cluster of the Eureka program. But before we dive deep into, hopefully, some inspiring conversations, we will give you a brief introduction about our process in the program and how we got to co-organize this evening.
Exactly. And as Tara has already mentioned, we're part of Eureka, which is hosted in 4 European cities. We're in Bilbao, in Venice, in Timisoara, and here in Amsterdam. And each of these European cities is building one living lab as part of this program. And in our case, we've been focusing on an area you might be familiar with, the so-called Bijenskwartier in Amsterdam. And it's quite the interesting area because it's in a crazy transition, because what used to be a former prison site and that has only closed its doors in 2016 is now aiming to become the healthiest neighborhood of Amsterdam, which is quite the compelling promise. I think we can agree on that. Yeah. But what exactly does that actually look like in real life?
Yeah, what does it mean, a healthy neighborhood? It's a term with quite a broad definition, But in short, it's a combination of the physical environment, the so-called hardware. And with that, we mean, okay, how is the city structured on eye level? How are the streets organized? How are public spaces arranged? And the social infrastructure, the so-called software, that indicates how citizens, how residents and communities engage with these public spaces. And while the hardware was taken care of the developer AM, we took a closer look at the social infrastructure that is indispensable when you want to create a healthy neighborhood. Yeah.
And the story that is being told about this neighborhood is so crucial towards the social infrastructure that is there and that will be there in the future, because it has an immediate impact on the sense of belonging among the residents that are already there and those who are yet to come. And people look towards these stories about places to find answers to questions like, do I belong here? And who's my neighbor? Do I see myself here in the future? And what is this neighborhood all about?
And the most ironic thing is that in the case of Bieskwartier, we had the feeling that the local DNA was not really taken into account in the narrative of the community strategy. And it's not only with the bias, but we see quite a pattern among many urban development projects. So we made a little compilation where we show ads of like urban development projects. And I would like to ask you to have a look and see for yourself what kind of story is being told.
Happy and healthy lives. An urban city district where nature and biodiversity thrives. A community that lives happy together. Where active and meaningful living is facilitated. A neighbourhood without cars. Where smart mobility is an obvious choice. With a healthy food environment. Buildings that are net zero and work seamlessly with the city's smart grid.
Giving rise to a business activity that imagines what is yet to be discovered and brings it to life. A sustainable island where living, working, learning, and investing is compatible with the protection of our environment. An island connected with its environment and the world. An island where life embraces all its dimensions. A place to invest, create, and believe. An island to live on. Now we're reborn.
Yes, so as you can see, these were 3 ads about 3 emerging districts. And the cities were Bilbao, Utrecht, and Amsterdam. And even though they differ in location, quite frankly, to me, it feels like they tell the same story. So the question that came up was, how can we create, how can we shape a narrative about areas in transition that are authentic to existing residents and new residents, while taking into account the past and at the same time create an inviting future vision.
And that's exactly the questions that brought us here tonight. And in our endeavor to find answers, we actually split up our group with half of us organizing this evening and co-hosting with you and Pakas de Zwijgers and many lovely speakers in an attempt to find answers together with experts from the field. Yes. And on the other hand, the other half of the group actually diving headfirst into the local stories of the Bieskwartier. And maybe you saw it already, but maybe you can put it on the screen. Actually, all of these stories were collected in a map. Later on, those of you who are in the room, you can also take a look right here on the table. You can tell that with a lot of love and attention to detail, these stories have been captured, and there's lots of information about the most important spots in the area. And there's reflection exercises, there's QR codes to lead you to an entire website, there's postcards. It goes really way further than the map itself. And the main objective of creating this map was to shed a light on the stories that are typically excluded from a main narrative, such as a marketing clip, as you would see there, and to help new and old neighbors meet each other in a fun and visual way. And if you would like to know more about this, then please come speak to us later or join us tomorrow at 3 to 5 p.m. at Levenslang in the Bijenskwartier itself for a whole afternoon of games and chats around
I
this.
do have a short question, if you don't mind.
Of
Mara,
course.
because how did you guys acquire all of this information? How did you go about it? How did you...
Well, actually through a lot of field work, but maybe one of my colleagues would be in the mood to answer this question.
We just reached out to people there and basically went there. And,
Sorry, people are looking.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, Mike is on your way. Yes.
so we basically reached out and fixed meetings with them.
Okay.
We're on the streets and we stopped people to have a chat. That was it.
Totally
Basically.
crazy old school, actually
Yeah.
having a conversation.
Having a conversation with people on the streets.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, you're more than welcome to join us tomorrow to dive deeper into that part.
What
And from 3 p.m. It goes about 2 hours, I think.
2 hours. Okay, good.
And the meeting point is Levenslang in the Bijenskwartier.
Levenslang in the Bijlmerskwartier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're very excited to explore with you all together the powerful tool that storytelling is. And thank you all for joining us tonight. We've been really looking forward to this. Our program is heading towards the end. And we're so grateful that we have a lot of lovely speakers to help us investigate this topic.
Yeah.
And with
Thank
that,
you.
the word goes back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mara and Chandresa. Short applause for them, please. Yeah. Thank you for explaining Eureka. And thank you for taking us through this wonderful project and taking also the time to explain it to us. Like you just mentioned, Mara, we have speakers. We have wonderful speakers that we have invited tonight. And I would invite them to join me right now. I would like to invite Simeon Blom, Director of Bureau Bijlmer Renaissance and Futurism, Senior Consultant at Easy Solutions. Please join me, Simeon. And I would also like to invite Nina Karim van Oort, a documentary maker, photographer, and also resident of Bijenskwartier. And last but not least, Anouk Rijntjes, the current development manager at AM Vastgoed, a real estate development company. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Nina, I would like to start with you. You are a resident, first of all, from the Bijenskwartier, because for the context, the Bijenskwartier was a former Bijlmer bias called Bijlmer bias, sorry. And but maybe you can explore on that. Before the Bijenskwartier, what was that place? What was that area?
A very, I think, very strange area because there was a lot of. Well, it was a combination of a lot of working places. There were students living there in student houses, and you had the prison, of course, and a little street next to it where the former guards of the prison would live. And I'm actually, I'm part of Bijesdorp, and that's a community of people that live there for. I think one of our members started living there 20 years ago, so for a long time.
Yeah.
And it's actually started for us, for our community. It started from the moment that a lot of the guards. It was already known that the prison would close down.
Yeah.
And
would be demolished, right?
Yeah.
Because it's no longer existing. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And at that moment in time, a lot of the guards left their houses. So for a long time, for really a couple of years,
Are you
these
talking
houses,
about the guards of the prisons, right?
Yeah, that were living in the street next to it.
Yes.
And this street was getting more and more empty. Like they left the houses empty for a lot of years. And at one point in time, there was a garage owner that was searching for a house for his daughter. And then he, together with a huge community of squatters, squatted the whole street. And we have a little clip
Okay.
Like you can see, it's a long way back from AT5 of the moment that they squatted this whole street. And that's how Bayesdorp, so Bayes village, kind of started. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, you're a current resident. How long do you live there?
I live there now for 2 years.
Okay.
But we're a community of mostly artists, former squatters, I guess housing activists in a way as well. And our group has been changing a lot. So I've been part of Bayesdorp for a longer time, for 3.5 years now.
Yeah.
And we have people that just joined, and we have people that already have been part of the community for 20 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, living and co-creating in Bayesdorp and in your job as a documentary maker, how do you feel about the current narrative of Bayeskwartier? How do you feel about it?
I think AM, I said it before, but AM can be really lucky that our community is there, because I do feel that in this 20 years, I think as a documentary maker, how I look at the neighborhood is that it's very important to not only collect stories, but also to keep the stories alive in a neighborhood. And that's also by keeping the people alive in the neighborhood and making space for the people that hold these stories. And I think especially for when you have a neighborhood that is literally changing, everything about the neighborhood is changing, to still have a sort of feeling of identity for what used to be there, it's very important to have some former residents there that can keep on telling the stories of, in this case, like when they started with Bayesdorp, we used to live, I'm saying we because I speak for my whole community, but we used to live there with, also with guards that were still working, some anti-squatters, and then you had squatters who also have a sort of position in society where they're not always, as accepted or frowned upon. And they would sort of, I would say, in a harmonious way, live together.
Yeah, as a community.
Should. We would make events. I think we had 7 festivals over these years that we lived there that had 600 to 800 people.
We see the photos of the screen, right? Is that a photo of one of your festivals?
Yeah, that's a photo of one of our festivals. Okay. We collected also stories for the festivals.
I wanted to ask that, because how do you collect those stories? And is it from residents or through locations? How do you do that? How do you go about that?
You mean as a documentary maker, also, or as a part of this community?
And as a part of this community, how do you collect those stories?
I think it's similar to the students of the Eureka project. So it starts with just going up to people and having a chat and walking around and getting to know your neighbors and, getting to know the names and understand what their problems are and what makes them happy. And so that's a start. But that's not only as a documentary maker, but also as a human being. This is something that I enjoy because it gives me a feeling of this beautiful word, belonging.
Belonging.
Yeah. Then, of course, there is this distinction between me as a documentary maker and then the fierceful community work that I do for Bayesdorp. Okay. So I'm not there to make... Well, I am actually filming a lot there as well, but I'm not only there to do my work as a filmmaker or as a storyteller, but I'm also there to do community building. And that's very necessary as well.
Thank you very much, Nina. I would like to now move on to Simeon. Simeon, welcome to this table. Thank you so much for honoring this invitation. We invited you to this table because of your role as director of Bureau Bijlmer Renaissance and Futurism. Can you please elaborate a bit more on what does your organization do? What does it stand for and your role within that organization?
Yes, of course. Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to tell something about it. I'm Simeon Blom. I live in Amsterdam Southeast. I was active in politics for 12 years until last year. And I was, of course, busy with storytelling. But now I'm also busy with storytelling on a different way. When we look at the Bijlmer a part of Amsterdam Southeast. We all know the situation. A lot of people were facing persistent inequality, poverty, and institutional discrimination. And still, we all know that position. But what many people don't acknowledge enough is that Southeast is, delivers the most talents. If you ask me, of course, I would say that.
Yeah.
The most talents on the aspect of sport, art, culture, our culinary tradition, our talents that create street fashion. It's really remarkable what
It's very remarkable
people
and
are
very
doing.
rich. Yeah,
You know, and music. I didn't mention music.
of course.
And we have a lot of young people, young professional that from the MBO, HBO, or university. But we see that often they move out to Almere or Purmerend. But we want to keep them, of course. And
They're moving out
because of for several reasons. Maybe the stigma the area has, but also people need houses. We don't have enough. We all are facing a housing problem, and also in Southeast. And with Bureau Belmer Renaissance, we really want to emphasize on those building blocks we already have. It's not that difficult. Those building blocks are standing in front of us. And it's time that we are going to recognize the fact that we in Southeast have for the last 2 years 2 or 3 artists that got a koninklijke prijs voor de schilderkunst.
Yeah,
from
a royal award.
Yes,
Yeah.
from our king. People should know in the whole of the Netherlands that that we have an artist, Vana Richters. Her artwork was hanging next to a Rembrandt, and that's a big statement. People should know that we in Southeast, we have a lot of potential inspired by Pata, the new originals.
Clothing companies, right?
Clothing companies, etc., etc. And with Bureau Belmer Renaissance, we really want to emphasize that on a positive way.
By bringing out those stories.
Yes, and to help develop Amsterdam, and especially this part of the city that was neglected too often, especially since we know something like the scandal with the tax authority. We all know that, the toeslagenschandaal. Most of the people most of the people who were victim came from
Southeast.
the Belmer.
Yeah.
People with the Surinamese and Caribbean background. Now I understand why so many people were jumping out of their building when I was growing up. Now I understand why many people were facing uithuisplaatsingen.
Yeah, so being put out of your house.
Yes.
Yeah, being evicted.
Yes.
Yeah.
And and it shows that this area, that Amsterdam, and this especially the residents, the people in the Belmer, we earn something like a Belmer futurism, and we earn something like a Belmer Renaissance. We are already in it.
We're already in it. Wow. If you want to give it applause, feel free to. Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And like you just said, the Belmer underwent many transformations. What role did storytelling play in these transformations?
Many transformations, indeed. I want to...
Maybe the importance of storytelling.
Yes,
maybe, yeah.
we have different transformations. Transformations in physical sense. Now the Southeast is getting bigger. More people will live in Southeast the coming 10 years. But Southeast also contributed on another transformation, more on system level. When we talk like something like addressing institutional racism in the political debate, Zwarte Piet discussion.
The Black Pete.
Yes,
Yeah.
I am proud that I was the person who took the initiative in the City Council for the National Slavery Museum, and also for the apology from our mayor. And now we are busy with the discussion about reparation. And those issues came from the Belmer, the people from Southeast that were telling their stories about inequality. They were already addressing it. So I think the Netherlands, can be thankful of the stories the people from Southeast were bringing forward. So the whole of the Netherlands, everybody in our kingdom can have a better life without inequality.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Simeon, for your contribution. A short introduction. Anouk, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, Anouk. Can you tell us more about your role as development manager at AM?
Yes, of course. Development manager means that I'm mostly my role is to tenders like bias. That was in 2017. I didn't work on it though. Okay. Purchasing from fields, places where we can develop stuff. Area development. That's I think the most important thing we do. AM is a big national area developer. For inspiring and mainly sustainable areas. And I'm mainly focused on Amsterdam region. Here you see the former penitentiary. It wasn't really a prison. There was only one tower, which was a prison that was for the women. But most people were there before they were sent to prison. Yeah, imprisoned. So they could be there like either for days or months. So there was a lot of transition of people getting in and out, which makes it also a very great story because there was a lot of, been a lot of people who've been there over the years with a lot of stories. Stuff like that, actually, that's what I do, for AM. Yeah.
AM, okay. And as a project developer for AM, can you tell us what kind of local stories and experiences you are usually more interested in hearing about?
Yeah, I love what the students did. Yeah, okay. I love what the students did. That's also what I always do when I start with a project. Mostly I start a project or I go to locations. I go and collect stories, I talk to people. I mostly do it myself, but there's also a lot of places where we hire locals to do it for us or with us because they're more known with the area. We call them city makers.
Stadsmakers.
Yeah, stadsmakers. Okay. So we're a part of city makers in the Netherlands. So everywhere where we are active, we connect with them and we ask them to help us. Yeah. This is Ede. It's a former fabric.
You're now talking about the photo that we...
Enka. Right? That was the name. And I think it's nice to mention that the names we use for the projects are mostly names that come from a story from the area.
Okay.
So this was a former factory for fibers. And I think we're developing 1,800 houses here, which is a lot of schools. For new people, so there's a lot of old buildings that are being renovated, and we add a lot of new houses, and we try to tell the stories. So this is one of the books we made. It says where every stone has a story, and we make these stories where we interview people who live there or live around there or are developing there. To collect the stories, so it's written on paper for our legacy, actually.
A legacy, so you're creating a legacy with the people coming from those areas.
Yes, so with the people, and it can be, because, a project development can take years. There's one project, I have some photos, but I don't know when they're coming. We bought it in 2005. And that's a long time ago. This one, yes, thank you. Okay. It's 2005. We bought this. It's an old. This is the old main office, and it's an old soap factory in Zaandam. They're still not being developed, so it's still it's run down. There are people hiring and sitting there. This is a gym, actually.
It's a gym,
and it's very funny because it's called Hilco. The former directors were Hillebrand and I think Co something. So it's Hilco. It's a soap factory. It's very, very famous in the Zaanstreek. And the Zaanstreek is obviously I think one of the oldest industrial areas in the world. Wow. So everybody knows this soap factory. And so the story tells itself actually because of the soap factory. And the fun thing here is that we bought this, we're developing it now. And I think 2 years ago, I got a call from a woman and she said, well, I'm the granddaughter of the former director who started a company, and I would really like to buy the old office.
Wow. Okay.
And I think that's the nice parts of developing in an early stage, that you can collect all these stories and people also come to you to tell their story.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one last question before we dive into our group discussion, because I have a few questions for all of you. What are the expectations you feel as a developer towards the way you introduce and sell an area development?
I think it's very important to tell the story and to collect the story, because obviously the business case is very important as well, but the story is mostly part of where you start. And you have to collect the story, because nothing sells without a story. You're not buying anything without a good story. And I think that it's very important to try to tell it in any way. I mean, even for grown-ups as for children also. We mostly forget the kids who go and live in an area. I brought another book which we made for kids in an area we're
really?
developing.
So there's like a version for adults and there's a version for children.
Yeah.
Okay.
We mostly forget children in our area development. We always forget the kids, but it's always the grown-ups who buy the houses, and we always forget that children are going to live there as well. I mean, not everywhere. Like in the cities, you know, they're mostly houses that are not really for families, but this is an area in Hoef van Haag that's close to Vianen. And they found 500 medieval coins when they were digging in the ground. And they asked all the kids from the neighborhood and the schools to make a drawing of one of the crooks actually who used to steal those coins.
Okay.
And so this one boy, he won. And there was this storyteller who made a whole story about it. It's called The Hidden Treasure of Hoef van Haag. And it tells about all the castles in the past. You see all the kids drawn, the pictures they drawn, and it's sort of Where is Wally? But it tells a story, and the coins are also within the playgrounds, and you have a sort of map when you start living there, so you can collect the coins.
You can collect the coins.
Yeah, it's a sort of safari in the area for all the kids. So we mainly focus there on a livable area and healthy area for children.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much, Nina. Applause. Yeah, thank you. Good. Well, like I just mentioned, let's start the group discussion, because I have a few questions for all of you. And the first one being, why do you think we need stories to move forward with urban developments? Where to apply them as well in the process? Where do we apply the stories that are necessary for the process? Somebody that would react?
Yeah, my first response, I guess, is that also a bit, you said it, and I think it's very true, like without stories you don't sell. And sometimes I have the feeling that stories are taking for selling instead of that the story actually is for this feeling, for creating identity that is not only a nice story for the new people that are coming, but it also feels respectful for the people that are leaving or the people that actually will experience the transition. So that's maybe not really an answer to the question, but I think it's already a sort of thinking a bit further, because yes, I think it's very important to collect the stories, and I think we more and more start realizing how important stories are, even, not only as a storyteller or filmmaker, all these things, but just for a feeling of, being part of something bigger. So that there's already in society, exactly, that we kind of understand the power of stories and that we need them, that it's very, something that's very important for us to understand ourselves and the community that we're part of. But I think the next question is, like, okay, so what is being done with these stories? Good and question. How does that, how is it respectful as well to the people that tell the stories?
And where to apply them in the process.
Exactly.
Simeon, I think I saw you wanted to respond as well.
I really think I totally agree with what you say, especially two things, what you said about identity and respect. When we look at urban development, for example, in cities like Rotterdam or Amsterdam, we see often that some neighborhoods are getting, for example, Bijenskwartier or other areas are getting a renovation, or the housings are getting demolished, and and I think that too often in our society and also in the politics and from the government, we don't recognize the fact that people were living there for 100 years, 50 years, 40 years, that it was a community.
A community, a whole social infrastructure.
A village or a social infrastructure. Yeah. And too often we don't mention that. It's only, okay, what is the budget? How many houses do we need? That's it. So
how much can we earn from it as well?
Yes, so I think it's really important for respecting the identity that was developed to integrate storytelling, and also when we also see too often, for example, now in Southeast we are facing more and more gentrification. I think that it's when we look at gentrification, what are the data, what are the numbers? Okay, that can show a sense of gentrification. But I think it's the stories, the experience people have that really can really address the problem on the best way. What is the experience people have on the sense of segregation, the sense of segregation, for example? That is really addressing the problem on the best way. And to the last thing I want to add is to say it shortly. I really think we should integrate more and more and more storytelling into policy, into urban development. If you ask me, we should use more futurism.
Futurism.
I don't know if it's a field in your profession.
Can you tell us what you mean
exactly?
with
What does futurism entail? Can you elaborate on that? Yeah.
For me, futurism is something that inspires. For example, Afrofuturism or Belmer futurism. How can we use and stimulate people, residential people, but also artists, writers, philosophers? How can they help us with their ideas, their fantasies, to help us think more out of the borders we have in our heads? I think futurism can help us do that, and we can use that as an inspiration in policy making, for example. I'm really happy that we are now. Could never imagine in my lifetime we would talk seriously about something like reparation here in Amsterdam. In the role of
can you explain a bit what do you mean with reparations? Because I can imagine that people in the room might not.
The city of Amsterdam, the mayor Femke Halsema did an apology for the role Amsterdam played in slavery history 2 years ago, and okay. Reparation goes about okay, what can we do to end the inequality that is part of the system, part of the history, inequality that grew historically. For example, in Southeast, people were facing a lot of racism, institutional racism, because of ideas people have about African people. And I really think that überhaupt the fact that we are talking about reparation is a futuristic thing. And how can we use futurism more to fill in the policy of reparation and to fill in the policy of the Masterplan Zuidoost, to fill in the policy of a Belmer Renaissance, to think out of the borders we have in our heads.
Wow. Wonderful.
Can I add something, Simeon?
Can I just, before you add something,
because
I also want to know how does AM development listen to this kind of advice, information? How do you incorporate that within your own process?
I really like it, and it's what I said about city makers. Everywhere we start, we're also now in the board of Amsterdam Zuidoost, because we really would like to hear the stories about residents. And we always ask local residents. We did tenders last year, and we involved residents from the Belmer that was in Gein. within our tender to tell the story, what they would like to see there, how we should do it. Because most of the time we don't live there. I mean, I live in Amsterdam, so I sort of know what's happening here. But
you're not a resident.
I'm a resident also, but
not a resident of that community.
Not of that community. So we always try to contact people who are residents and who know the story better than we do. Yeah.
Okay.
And sometimes use Pakhuis also for that, because do you know someone we could talk to, because they have a big network. So it's also about trying to connect to your network to try to get the stories from different areas. And I think it's because we're talking now about the city, but we also have project developments outside the city, open fields where they plant houses, and we have to build like 15 to 1,800 houses. And you have to start a story, so you dive into history to look up the stories told in the past hundreds of years. You start development, and it can take years and years and years. And through the years, you're developing, new stories come in, like we found the coins and stuff like that. So in the time you're developing, a lot of stories pass you, which you can use.
Use as well. Okay, well, thank you, Anouk. Nina, you wanted to add to what Simeon was telling about futurism and it being incorporated within the whole policy, exactly.
What it's triggered in me, or the idea that I got is that a lot of the times when we think of storytelling as a productive, as a form of something productive, we think of positive stories or funny stories or anecdotes, or for instance. So we think of things that are easy to sell because positivity sells easily. But I think crafting the identity of a neighborhood, I lived for 10 years in the Bijlmer. I collected stories there as well. Only a little tiny bit, but I know a little bit also about Zuidoost and about the feeling. I know nothing about it, but
you recognize it.
I was there as a documentary maker and I listened. That's it. But that a lot of the times when we collect stories for a purpose of selling, for instance, then we kind of toss aside the painful stories or the harsh stories or the awkward stories or the very uncomfortable stories. Yeah. But that's actually that's the core of what identity and having respect for identity is, to face these very awkward, painful histories and to sort of take them with us to also, tell them over and over again, so that we can learn from it, maybe.
Yeah, learn from it, but not...
Also acknowledge.
That's it, acknowledge.
But not exploit.
Yeah.
Like some...
and I find that also very interesting with Bias Kwartier. I've been thinking a lot the last couple of months about the way that we use bias, the word. I'm saying we, because AM does it. We called our village Bias Village when we... were part of this street, and somebody of my community told me that there was a day that somebody was walking around, said like, "Hey, what is happening to this neighborhood?" And then we were telling about our project, or my colleague was telling about the project and about Bijesdorp and the history and how the positive stories of community that we felt in this history. And then he says, wow, this person said like, wow, I don't have that same, I really don't get a positive vibe from this neighborhood, because I had a family member in this prison. And for me, it actually was tied to a place where I didn't really want it to be. And that really made me think about, when you craft an identity of a neighborhood, what are we going to do with the fact, and this is the documentary in me talking, what are we going to do, my community, your community, with the fact that we're on soil where there's actually a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort. Yeah. I don't know yet, but it is definitely a question that I'm asking myself.
It's funny you say that. A friend of mine lives in Amsteldorp, close by, and he's looking for a new house with his boyfriend. And I told him, well, why don't you look at Bijenskwartier? We have a lot of houses there, and it's going to be a nice area. I said, no. I don't want to live there because it has bad vibes. It's like, oh, I never heard anyone saying that. But at that point, I started thinking, yeah, of course it has. He says, no, people were locked in there. I do not want to live on that ground. Yeah.
So how do we go about that, Anouk? I like your question, by the way.
Yeah, it's funny. Because we always try to add a positive note of an area, and we transform it to a positive area with a lot of green and people in communities and happy and healthy. And that's the story we're telling, because people have to live there and they have to be happy. But there's also, of course, the painful story of the area, which we're not telling because it's a painful story.
Maybe that's a good question for also the audience. We're now switching, by the way. Because we also would like to give the audience here in this room, but also online, the opportunity to ask you guys questions. For those who are watching online and want to ask a question, use menti.com, and you can use the following code 64382986. Is there somebody at this point who would like to ask Nina, Anouk, Simeon a question about what we just discussed? Chandresa, yes? Yes, please. The mic is coming your way.
Hello. Thank you. Yeah, I have a question to you, Anouk, because I can see that AM is really putting effort in collecting the stories and bringing them out. And what I'm just wondering is, because we also saw a short clip of the marketing video from the Bijenskwartier, and I'm just wondering, why wasn't that included in the video? It seems like a great opportunity to use it.
Yeah, of course, and you're totally right. As I said, I was not involved in the Bijenskwartier, and we do a lot of other projects also. I don't know if you've looked at our website. What other? So we develop in the entire country. So all projects are different, and also this one. And I think we started in 2017. We won the tender based on a story Rijksvastgoedbedrijf en de gemeente Light. And we continued on that story. But you're totally right that in the meantime, other stories are told, or you have to collect or search for new stories. So I don't know. I don't really have an answer to your question, but I think you are making a fair point. Yes, definitely.
Was it also externally?
The mic, yeah.
Or was it made by?
Chandresa, one moment, the mic.
Sorry.
If you can repeat it,
yes,
please. Also
okay.
For the audience,
I was wondering, is that like externally outsourced? So does a different company do the videos, or is it AM itself?
I think the video making we outsource it. We don't have video made, but the story we always work together. So it's always people from us, and there's a lot of people from AM involved in Bijenskwartier. I think through the years that might be like 20, 30, 40 people involved in this project, and we use city makers, filmmakers, everyone to tell and try to tell the stories. But I think, of course, sometimes you might miss a thing, or you go another direction because we all like that direction better than. So I'm very happy with your research you're doing as students in Bijenskwartier, and I love the map. It really triggers me and inspires me. So thank you for that.
Okay, there's another question in the room. Yes.
Yes, I've been hearing a few. And actually, this is maybe for Simeon, but also for Nina. Thank you, Nina, for bringing the collective pain also on the table, because I think we do need to share stories where we need to acknowledge that. And Simeon actually brought it also with renewing, how do you call it? Herstellen? Reparation
yeah.
of the whole slavery part. But I'm hearing sense of belonging. I'm hearing that storytelling is important, but what does it really, in an emotional way, why does it brings us to our heart? But what is it really that it does with us? What does it, I'm wondering, somehow it seems like there's something deeper here that we need to explore.
So you're questioning it, what does it do to our emotional well-being, like emotional state? Yeah.
The stories we hear.
the stories we hear,
Yeah.
but also, talking about, what Nina was just bringing up, the collective pain of the place.
Yeah.
And you were talking about Anouk. It's interesting that, we always tend to have funny, positive stories, and the ones that we remember are actually the ones that are ugly.
Yeah.
So it triggers something in an emotional way.
Yes.
So I was wondering what that is.
Maybe I can add something to it. As I said, I am really a champion for something like a Bijlmer Renaissance and an Amsterdam futurism and a Bijlmer futurism. But it came from somewhere. It came from a feeling and maybe a certain pain. Growing up, seeing that inequality with several cases and examples I can give. What is especially out of the idea that we are gonna recognize that. We are not gonna do like nothing happened for 40 or 50 years. People were denied their rights with institutional racism or inequality, etc., etc. Like nothing happened. We're gonna face forward. Okay, yes, but we are gonna mention it, and we are now going to reach a situation where we all in the city of Amsterdam can enjoy our full potential, especially our young children that are growing up. And I think ideas like futurism and fantasize about what we all can achieve. It can be achieved more on a realistic way than we might think. I think we should stimulate that much more in our culture because we have a different type of history, a different type of story. And to change that maybe sometimes negative feeling in an area or in another way, we need to develop other stories. And we are the story makers.
Yeah, so it can trigger or create a kind of creativity is what I also hearing those stories and what it does to your mental state. Thank you so much for that question. Do you want to answer that as well?
Well, I liked it that you said like it's the painful memories that we actually remember, and then when I heard you talking, Simeona, I thought, that's, it's also unforgettable. So it's these are the stories that you remember. So that's for me that it makes complete sense to give them a place. Oh. It's only a bit difficult when you have to sell stuff.
Inspiration,
but it's definitely
inspiration.
Yeah. So it's unforgettable, and that doesn't mean that it's told. So I think it's also this kind of. I think stories consist of things that you experienced, maybe future, like the things that you will experience in the future, and that therefore it's because I'm hearing a more of a philosophical question also in your what you were saying, like what does it do, the stories? And I think if you do not recognize these things that are unforgettable, then it's like you always have a piece missing. And somehow I think that's the core of storytelling, is that we're trying to keep the pieces together, to feel like we are part of something bigger, that feel like we are part of, a history, that we are part of a future together somehow.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you also for answering that question. Okay, I see another question, and I'm also curious to know whether we have questions from our online audience, because I don't see any questions appearing on my tablet here on the table. So there are online questions. Okay. Yeah, thank you. There are no questions appearing in my tablet, guys. Sorry. And I also would like to check, because we're falling a bit behind time. Are we allowed to answer that question as well, or do we want to? Yes, is that okay? Okay, sir. I think you had a question, or lady. I'm sorry, it's so dark. I can't see. I can't see who's. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good evening. My question is: I have the feeling that. We're talking like there's one story to be told about the neighborhood. I have the feeling that there's many stories, and there's often very conflicting stories as well. I don't know, from other places that people want to keep a building, or some other people want to destroy a building that can create heavy emotions. I'm interested in how we can kind of mediate between those sometimes heavy opposing interests. I think also in the case of the Bijenskwartier, there's clearly also like, strong oppositions, people telling a story about a new wealthy and healthy neighborhood, and people that are there that are like want to stick with what they have. And so they are defending another kind of future. And my question would be like, how can we try to mediate between those opposite positions?
Somebody that would like to answer in short, please, because there's a fourth guest speaker that we have to introduce.
Beautiful question.
There's always people who would like to maintain buildings that are already there. But I think you have to think, can you maintain the building? Can you reuse it? And some of the buildings, especially from certain developments in the 70s or 60s, are not good for reusing. You cannot do anything with it anymore. It's you have to tear them down and build something new, because they're for reuse. They're really not usable. So we always look at the buildings and do research if we can keep them. But there's a lot of emotions involved, because sometimes you say, well, it's like in Zaandam, it's always, but it's erfgoed. You have to keep it because it has a story in the storyline of Zaanstad. And then people who live around it say, oh, please get rid of it. I have to face it every day and it's so ugly. And you have to find your way in between, like to please all people. And that's quite difficult. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you. Simeon, you also want to...
Yes, a beautiful question, I think. If you allow me, I want to interpret it on a slightly different way, being creative with it. I think when we look at discussions in the society that polarize, we can give different examples. For example, a policy for better sustainability or gentrification or whatever. I am really in a favor of using artists much more, creative people with their art or with their music. We should use that much more on a societal way. Okay. Maybe in policy, but also in bringing people together or helping us as a society see the future. What direction can we go? So I'm really in favor of doing that much more.
Much more.
Yes.
A bigger scale.
Is there still time?
A small bit. Because we really have to... you can add really quickly.
It's very... I completely recognize what you're saying, but I think it all comes with understanding that there are conflicting ideas, and also recognizing that they are there. And I think artists can be great for doing that, for showing the complexity, showing the multiple layers of... So I completely agree with you.
Thank you.
Also making it instrumental, not only placing it in a museum, what is good, but also make it instrumental.
Exactly.
The art.
Thank you, Simeon. Thank you all. Please stay seated. I would like to introduce, by the way, our online audience. I'm so sorry. I see the questions, but I can't share them at this point. There's another round coming, and we'll try and see and figure out if we can still ask the questions that you just proposed. Because I have to now introduce our fourth and final speaker of tonight, Cas Woudstra. Cas, thank you. In short, you are a participatory researcher and designer at Reframing Studio, and you are about to introduce the research and design methodology of social design office Reframing Studio.
Yeah.
Cas,
hi everyone.
The floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, a short intermezzo. So I'm Cas indeed. I'm a researcher and a designer. Currently at Reframing Studio, and before I started here, I worked as a PhD researcher on participatory design or co-design of medical technologies. So totally different field. Yeah, and I work at Reframing Studio. Oh yeah, I have the pointer. I'm part of a small studio. We work with, I've 12 other colleagues.
Okay, and a dog?
And a dog.
It's
often at the studio.
Okay.
Yeah. We work for a lot of different, with a lot of different partners. So here's a selection, and things that I worked on are, for example, redesigns of the mental health care system. That's a co-creation project where I, together with professionals and people with experience in the mental health care system, we tried to deliver new ways of giving healthcare. We're making visions, for example, how we want to relate to water in the next century, and how we can create new forms of living with water. And I'm working on new diverse ways of imagining scientific careers for scientists. So this was today. I had a full day of involving scientists in the ways that they can perceive or steer their own careers. So now you might ask why I am here, because I'm not involved in the bias project, and we do all sorts of things. But I think that is precisely because I'm part of what we are sometimes called a social design studio. Oh, wait. A social design studio, but we're also future-oriented. So there are two roads that also tie into your story. But the first aspect is that we try to make designs that are durable and future-oriented, so that you don't kind of solve problems that currently exist and might vanish once you finish your design. So that's the first, I think, pillar of our method. And we are social, like I said. And what that means is that we start from interaction, so to say. So we don't start with the product as such and trying to make a new iteration to make it more beautiful, for example, or more aesthetically pleasing. But we try to start with the interactions that we want to kind of foster, and then we think of the designs that might foster these types of interaction. So, it is a whole method that we use. It's made by Matthijs van Dijk. He's a professor at the university, Technical University in Delft. And here's a little bit of what I told. But I think the most important aspect is that we start with the future context, which ties into your story, I think. There are all kinds of dynamics that steer the future, so to say, that drive the future forwards, and that we think you need to take into account in the design that you make. And that is the part where we do a lot of studies, where we involve people in ways to come up with driving forces of the future, so to say. And once we have composed a kind of a frame that includes all these driving forces, then we can think of a desired interaction in that future, in that imagined future, so to say. So that is the theory, and I think I want to show you a spatial case that we once did, just to make it a little bit more tangible of what we do and how you can use the method. And that is this case. This is the Willy Bordes estate. It is an old estate. I think it is a century old, an old estate, and it reminded us of the old asylums or secluded places where people with mental needs were put, secluded from society, so that the society wouldn't have to interact with these people with mental illnesses, and that was kind of the vision that steered the design of these asylums that have all these nice greeneries, where you can walk through.
Very secluded, yeah.
But where there are own bakeries, they only had their own sports club, but totally secluded from society.
Yeah.
And we were asked to kind of reimagine what you could do with this spatial area. So then this is the floor plan of the Villibordes estate. It's by the way quite close to Heilo, a city in the northern part of the Netherlands. So what we did first, we imagined the future context, and that is, I think, where the stories come in. So here we interview a lot of experts, people with mental needs, literature studies, futuristic ideas, and then we come up with a couple of dynamics that kind of compose this new vision of what mental health care should do, and that we translate into forms of desired interaction. So these 6 things I just showed you, they all translate into forms of spaces actually that meet these or that foster these interactions. So caring, staying, grounding in a place. So there's a picking. But that's an interaction you want to foster by creating a picking garden. People want to move, meet each other. So once you, kind of scope these different interactions you want to foster, then you can make visual maps how these interact or relate to each other, and you can map them and see how these like more schematic interactions really relate to the floor plan. So for example, when I move in or zoom in on moving, there are these different forms of interaction, or this is a form of interaction that are met by the different physical spaces that you can create over there, that taken together form kind of a spatial maps and form a sort of composition of interactions that a place should nurture. Sometimes you make, I think Anouk, for you this should be quite.
What calls, can I ask you a question?
Of course you can.
Sorry. The microphone, please. Yeah.
Are you saying to us, just for clarification, that the words you use to make all these later things come out of stories?
Yeah, I think.
Good question.
Studies. And part of the studies are like the local stories that are at hand. So I think in our method, it's a part of the stories are a part of the study that we do. Mostly gathered by interviews, but my own research, I saw there are a lot of methods that you can use to.
So it's old DNA.
No, this over here, this is also new. It's all new. It's everything composed together. Okay.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah, and I have a small other visual that I also wanted to show you from a slightly other instance. But it ties into the question that you had, how to kind of combine different needs in spatial plans. This is also a mental health care institution, where you saw on the blue lines that people that live there, they really wanted to move. So we came up with kind of moving paths that you can like use if you want to like do sports or walk, hike a bit. But then you have the blue dotted lines, the black dotted lines over there. And these are the spaces that the mental health care professionals need to use in order to access, for example, when they're in place A, in order to access place C in the most efficient way. When there is a crisis, for example. So I think there are normally we think of design as a sort of one design that kind of needs to meet all the needs of all the people involved. but I think there are all sorts of fine-grained ways where you can combine these needs into one idea or one floor plan. Yeah, so that was it.
Thank you, Cas. Please join us at this table. Applause, applause, applause. Well done. Yeah, I can imagine that's quite a bit to present. Thank you, Cas, for joining us. I have to be a bit strict on time because we have exactly, let's see, 18 minutes to round up, and we have some questions that I want to elaborate on. First of all, Cas, I like the question that was being asked from the audience. In relation to that, what story should be covered for social research? And then specifically in the case study of Bias Quartier, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I really liked your futuristic, like the story that you told, Gideon, that there are all sorts of Afrofuturism that you also need to incorporate and that can have a place in the design. So these are, I think, social stories that you can incorporate. But yeah, like the social map, I think, is a starting point of the things that are in a spatial proximity. But yeah, it's also kind of a cultural proximity that aren't covered. You know, I think what you told is more kind of a cultural proximity to this place that aren't covered in a spatial map as such. So there are all sorts of ways you could think of stories that needed to be incorporated and forms of interaction that need to take place at the Bias Quartier.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Cas. I have a question for all of you. What steps would need to be taken in the future to see an acceptance and inclusion of authentic stories in urban development communication?
If you ask me, I think what I really like of this sheet, or one of the sheets, is just sit and watch. I don't know where it is.
You saw a sheet which said just sit and watch. From the Eureka project?
Yes. Just sit, watch, and just see what is happening on the street. How people are moving, how people are talking, what type of people are using the space. Because that is really related to a lot of things. And I think we should look more on an ethnographic way to the city. For example, when we are going to make Southeast bigger with 20,000 more people, okay, that's good. But can we first just sit, watch, and look,
observe
things that observe what are going well, but more importantly, things that we already know are not going very well. For example, a lot of people who are vulnerable in some parts of the city. And when you are going to make the area bigger with 20,000 people, are you also going to add more services and amenities or not? And when you observe more, you can maybe feel on a futuristic way what can be happening in that area within 10 or 15 years. So I think that we should add that way more in social research and especially in urban development.
Sit, watch, observe.
Yes.
Thank you.
And act on it.
And act on it, of course. Yeah. Thank you, Simeon.
Yeah, can I add to that
as
well? I think a lot of the time, but it's also, so how a place is developed is that what you see now is that a lot of the times developers or the municipality or the bigger parties, they say, well, we have this afternoon, an hour, we will be here. If you have something to say, please come. Okay, we've got lives too. We're not being paid for it. So I think one of the main things for getting to keep an identity, to keep the stories, is actually exactly what Simeon was saying, is doing also from a higher position, being proactive in activity. So sitting and watching, being proactive in not asking the people that live there that have the stories to come to you, but actually to come to them. You know, in a moment that it fits them. And so it's a whole to also understand that we're reliant on each other, and that for the municipality, for the developers, for everybody, for the people that are in control, they cannot do without this, without the stories, and without the person that has been there for 50 years already. But if they understand this better, that they cannot do without, then I think they should also be more proactive in a way. Yeah.
Okay. And just to add to that, like, what does an urban innovator then need in their toolbox to go for this way of development, according to you?
Well, I was thinking about another answer actually to the question.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about the future. And the future is in 10, 15 years. So that means that people, I'm an area developer. So I think about my future residents. And those are mostly children now between their 10 and 20 and maybe a little older, of course. But I think it's a whole different group you have to approach in a different way. And I think artists really are needed in that, but also artificial intelligence. So I think we have to...
AI.
Yes, definitely. So I think we have to focus more on how are you telling the story to whom? Because now we were talking about the kids. We did a lot of research on children. Yeah. And also when you sell a house, what are the emotions of the children and the parents in, the whole development of the house and when they go and live there. And they're totally different. Like the parents are happy because they bought a house. The children are very unhappy because the parents bought a house and they have to move. So what do these children need and what story are you going to tell them in that process? It's a whole different story than you tell the parents. Yeah. You have to make sure the children feel already at home before they live there. They have to know their friends via an app or a TikTok or whatever. So you have to approach them in a whole different way. So it's for whom and in what way. And I think there's a lot of things we can do in the future in AI, yeah. Definitely.
AI being one of the tools.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Like I said earlier, we weren't able to answer or discuss the questions that were being asked by our online audience. I would like to take a moment to do that right now. And one of the questions that was asked is, to what sense of belonging does storytelling help and why? So let me repeat. To what sense of belonging does storytelling help and why? To what sense of belonging?
Even in
Do
Nederlands.
you understand the question?
Narrative telling help
in
have a
sense of belonging.
Is that the question?
I think so. Yeah.
Or it's a question about what does belonging actually mean.
Yeah, and how can
which part of belonging?
Yeah. Well, whatever way you interpret it, because this is one of the questions that have been asked by the audience online.
Yeah, it would be a problem if just storytelling that was the only tool that could foster belonging. Belonging is something that you do by living there and you belong to that place. And by storytelling, you can communicate a sense of belonging, but that's not it. That's not it.
Yeah,
right?
I think the question is, how can storytelling contribute to the sense of belonging? Please.
So that is how
Correct me if I'm wrong, online audience, but this is how...
If I can add, I really think it does help to create a sense of belonging. So I think, policy makers, urban development, developing people, please use artists, people who are using spoken words, because they are really important in creating social cohesion. When I walk in Southeast, I see really spoken words printed on the walls. People are mentioning Angelo Bromet and other heroes we have in our area.
I believe, Simeon, you're also on a wall.
I don't know. Do I?
In Poort?
No, it's not me.
Oh, sorry. Echt waar?
It's not me.
Oh, really?
You're not the first person who thinks that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, but
sorry.
I can dream of it, but
yeah.
people are proud of their neighborhood and use that with words and with art and with storytelling. Please, policymakers and people in urban development, it's gold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be gold.
It can be gold. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. What is really nice about spoken word is also that it uses different kind of shapes for. Also, when we think in storytelling, a lot of the times we think in chronological narrative, or in histories that somehow come chronologically. But sorry, English. But the nice thing with spoken words, or with telling stories from different, paintings, different using different perspective, is that you sort of you don't only use like the words and the histories, but also the vibes or the energies or the smells free. Or the it's more inclusive somehow in.
It's more free.
Yeah,
free.
In how memory works as well. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Good, thank you. That was the online questions. Are there any questions in the audience? Is there somebody that would like to ask our panel members a question? Yeah, unfortunately, we have room for one question. I'm so sorry. I have to be strict because it's an online session. It's also online, and we're being watched live. So
I am fast.
Yeah.
This might be a question even more for the Eureka people themselves, because I was wondering, why did you choose the Bias Quartier, which isn't really a neighborhood? There's the Bias Dorp, which is more street, but there isn't really a neighborhood. So I was wondering, why the Bias Quartier? Because there's so many more interesting neighborhoods in Southeast that are really in transition, for instance, through gentrification or the redevelopment. But this is really a purely redevelopment project. So I was wondering, why did you choose this? Let's leave it with that. Yeah.
I chose.
Sorry.
You are the one that chose?
I was the one that chose.
Okay.
That is my prerogative as a teacher to choose the projects I work with. And Janine, who is sitting over there, also works at the Hogeschool van Amsterdam. And she works there and is working on the whole gezondheids thing, healthy neighborhood thing. And we started talking together, and I said, I don't know if it's feasible, but I think it could be interesting for the students to just see if that is the thing that is needed here. And as you can see, it is not the thing that was needed here. They came up with other things. So at the Master Urban Management, I always have these projects, and I agree with you. I could have chosen a much more interesting thing, but I thought, let's choose something that is maybe not so hip and sexy, but maybe it can become something. And that's what I'm seeing, and I really acknowledge the students here, that they came up with these maps, telling the stories of the old people that live there and the new people. And I think that is what is necessary at this point in time. So that is why I chose it.
Thank you very much.
By the way, if you have projects, I always need new projects. Every August, September, I need new projects.
Belmer.
Good. Belmer. Yes. Simeon has a suggestion here. Thank you.
Good,
Thank you so much for answering that question. And on that note, I would like to conclude this evening, because this concludes our Dimension events in collaboration with Eureka project. And in closing, I'd like to express my gratitude to our distinguished panelists for their valuable insights and perspectives. It has been an engaging and enlightening discussion. Thank you very much for that. I would also like to thank you all online, but also those who are in this room for your time and your contribution this night. We look forward to future conversations and endeavors. So please keep updated by going to the website of Pakhuis de Zwijger. You can find all information there about the programs which are free. And you can also become a friend of Pakhuis de Zwijger by scanning the QR code, which is going to be displayed on the screen right now. So if you would like to become a friend of Pakhuis de Zwijger, you can feel free to scan the QR code. And you can also watch back live you can also watch back the episodes that have been streamed live on www.dezwijger.nl/DCFA. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Heb je hier nog meer van?